Thanks, Professor Sabrinathan, for joining us today.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure to have you with us. I'm here today to understand the COVID scenario has been challenging for everybody. And I think it's been a rough ride for everybody in this environment. I wanted to have a conversation with you on how IIM and students at IIM are addressing the challenge that has just come out of nowhere. Let me start off by asking you, how has the IIM community sort of bonded around this, and how are they sort of addressing this challenge?
Well, it's not been different from anyone else. We've been taking the usual precautions as a community. When you talk about the IIM community, it has several stakeholders and constituencies. The students are clearly among the more important of the constituencies, but there are people residing on campus, there are staff working here, and there are other people in the service providers and so on. So what we've been doing is we've essentially been taking all the standard precautions in terms of social distancing at workplace, to the extent that we have to let people come into work, to the extent that people can operate from home. We've been encouraging them to do that, and we've been sanitizing the workplace and so on. Yeah, it's not different from what everybody else has been doing.
I understand what you're saying, that the response has been the sanitization, etc. But tell me about the learning. What is happening on the learning front? How have students taken to the online learning environment? Have they shifted seamlessly, or are there challenges with that?
Okay, so let me first of all, try and articulate what our thinking has been and how we have approached the learning challenges. So around mid-March, when the pandemic was officially declared as a national health emergency, we quickly put together a group under the leadership of the director at that time, Professor Raghuram. So we constituted a steering group which had in it the head of the administration of the campus, who's the dean administration. And then it had the dean programs, who is the official, the member of the leadership team that manages entire program design and delivery across all programs, executive, degree granting, everything. So in other words, we had a steering group that had representation at the highest levels in the leadership team. And among the earlier decisions I recall is that the leadership team said, we'll be very careful. We'll be as careful as we need to be. But having said that, we'll try our best to ensure that students who signed up our programs for our programs do not suffer unduly because we push our programs out and so on. That was one important guiding principle. They didn't articulate it in as many words, but having sat through some of the meetings, I could clearly see that thinking coming through. The second thing that we were very conscious of is that online learning was going to be a key piece of managing the challenge thrown by COVID. And we realized quickly that we had a fair amount of experience in managing the online learning process, including online evaluation, online examinations, and whatever else. So we said, this was not trying to be competitive in any way, but I think we said that we have certain capabilities that we seem to have acquired. I don't think anybody would say we were far-sighted enough to say that we would one day come upon this challenge and we need to be prepared for it. But having said that, somewhere along the leadership at IIM realized that online learning is going to be an important way of in academic life in future. So we had the MOOCs, which at IIM, which has a very high participation level, as you might know. So we pulled in all the learnings we had from our experience in MOOCs. So for example, I was head of admissions when the pandemic became a national emergency. So we had been fortunate to have completed most of our process, but there were still some processes left. And we realized we had already adopted a platform called Metal, which allowed us to complete the rest of the process as if nothing had happened. I mean, we ran our admissions this year in a way that really didn't seem to make any difference because of our going online. So long story short, I think so therefore we said that we must use this strength to ensure that our students don't suffer unduly in terms of delayed programs, scattered schedules, and whatever else. So again, long story short, we said that we will work towards maintaining a graduation day that's not very far from what it would have been had there been no pandemic. So if you look at our current calendar, I think all our program students will graduate probably not very far from the time they would have graduated if there had been no pandemic. So given these guiding principles, we worked around, we created the schedules. We quickly invested very, very significantly in the online learning infrastructure. We have about 23 classrooms now that have been created in a space of less than 2.5, 3 months. And so we have plenty of capacity. We put together a digital learning coordination group, which had people in it that had worked extensively on our MOOCs programs and so understood the challenges of digital learning, both the soft and the hard part of it, the infrastructure part of it, the soft infrastructure and the hard infrastructure part of it. So they and their respective program chairs got together and they worked out the implementation steps in a great level of detail. So much so, at least from the teacher's side, we have moved into that in a fairly seamless way. From the student side, I think it would be a sort of unrealistic for me to imagine that the learning experience has been completely the same that it would have been in a classroom. But having said that, what we've been doing all along is to make sure that as and when challenges emerge, we are prepared to sort of deal with them. So much so, I would imagine that if you were to run a poll with the students, you would find that a large number of them are quite happy with the level of learning. What they would all repeatedly say is we miss the classroom in terms of the social experience of a classroom, the interaction with the teacher, the peer networking, etc., etc. But the learning itself, the pedagogy itself, has not suffered significantly because of online learning. Is what I imagine many students would say. I've been talking to them anecdotally. I manage a program myself, the 1-year program. I talk to them, and they all seem to be highly appreciative of the fact that their learning hasn't suffered.
So you mentioned about MOOCs and IMB's capability there in the classrooms that you've been adding. But there is a sort of psychological readiness on the part of students when they undertake a MOOC. And I know it's an unfortunate situation, so we are all doing the best. But to understand really what the response is, do students feel any gap? And how do they kind of manage with classwork? How do they manage with peer learning? How are they talking to each other in groups? Is there any change that you have undertaken to enable that? Because it is a full-time program. How do you enable their participation in this environment?
Right. So for the 1-year MBA, let me confine myself to that for now because there are other counterparts managing other programs. But for the 1-year MBA, what we did was, and this was, I think, an idea that was mooted by the current director, Professor Hrishikesh Krishnan. He said, we should try and do some exercises to create an online community. So he roped in one of our faculty colleagues who's an HR faculty and HR specialist. And she ran a series of sessions beyond the classroom where she would create bonding sessions, she would breakout sessions, games, and various other, instruments that HR folks have at their command. And the idea was to sort of help people, people were all physically separated. Keep that in mind because we are talking about April, May, June, when the country was completely locked down and we were running our classes, all right? So being mindful of the fact that they would not be able to physically mingle, we created these sessions. Feedback from the students, for instance, we had 7 sessions or so planned. We had to cut it short at 5 because of other academic compulsions. So when we went back to the students, they said they would want those 2 sessions, additional 2 sessions. So I guess something worked well for them. And they felt that they were able to sort of break out of their mental and physical silos by being part of these sessions. Would it be the same as being inside a classroom? Clearly, we would be kidding ourselves to imagine that it is so. But as I said, our own approach has been built on 2 principles. One, when it comes to learning, online learning can be nearly as effective as in-classroom learning. 2, on the other dimensions of the academic experience, clearly we would be found wanting unless we take conscious steps to address some of those. So which is what we've been doing. I don't know if that answers your question, but.
Yes, it does. It does answer my question. So the faculty and the students have been braving through. I think that's what I'm understanding. That's the gist that I'm getting, that, you know, people are trying to adapt. There is a bit of a sticky issue maybe when it comes to recruitment. And again, you know, I'll be happy to have a wonderful recruitment session everywhere. But I want to understand, what do you think is the perception of recruiters in this market? How are they going to respond to a class which is studied largely online in a course which is meant to be residential? Do you think they are going to be okay with that, or what do you think the response is going to be?
So that would, as we might say in academic or research parlance, be an empirical question. Unless you get into the recruitment process, you wouldn't be able to make a definite comment on that. Having said that, there are 2 other responses I would attempt. One is the head of career development services, the placement group, that is. They've been talking to recruiters for a variety of reasons, because, you know, soon after the pandemic, there was a fear that jobs that have been offered might be withdrawn or joining dates might be deferred, and a little bit of all of that happened too. And so partly to deal with all that, they've been in touch with the recruiters. And I talked about a group that was constituted earlier. I think that group was a wonderful idea from the previous director. We really got a chance to talk a lot amongst ourselves as people who are leading various activities or functions in the institute. So what I recall distinctly from those conversations is the head of career development services saying that, you know, recruiters don't seem to see the situation any differently. Having said that, many recruiters are facing their own economic / business compulsions. The economy is, after all, shrunk by a quarter, and that's not going to leave anyone untouched or unaffected, right? So to that extent, recruitment plans may undergo a change, but do they see the value of the MBA program as being any diminished? That's not the sense we get, right? So that's one comment. The other comment is that when we look at our own, you know, if you look at the entire process, right, the campus experience, as it were, it has broadly 3 components, and, you know, that's something that anybody would easily guess. One is the learning from the textbook and the classroom and the instructor, the standard pedagogic instruments that one has. The second would be the peer learning, and the peer learning is not just textual learning, it's not conceptual learning, it's not tools and techniques, but it's a lot many more softer aspects. And the third, of course, is the social experience. Now, because, I mean, clearly, if we had had the second element, the students' learning would have been far more complete, right? But if I'm a recruiter, I'm looking at somebody who has been through a structured training program. The learning process has been managed pretty much as it would have been in a classroom. The testing has been done as we would have done in a regular physical classroom. So Metal allows us to do that, right? I'm not making a pitch for Metal here. There must be other platforms. It's just that we have chosen Metal, but Metal seems to be capable of ensuring that we run robust testing processes. So given all of that, I think more than 80% of the learning, if I may hazard a number, I guess, more than 80% of the learning is more or less intact. The remaining 20% is all of those softer stuff, right? Clearly, the networking aspect is going to suffer, and networking is an important element of any business school experience. So those are missing elements. But does that make the student who comes out of an IIM any less valuable? I would not think so. I mean, if I was a recruiter, I'm still looking at, I mean, at the end of the day, let's face it, what are recruiters coming here for? They're coming here looking for intrinsically bright people. I mean, I'm just talking about the IIMs now. I'm not necessarily saying this would apply to every school, but they're coming to a place where they are likely to find bright people who've gone through a difficult selection process. That hasn't changed. The same competitiveness prevails in terms of getting it. In terms of what we do inside the classroom, it's largely intact. So yes, they're looking at a set of people who are not socialized, bonded, blah, blah, blah. Would it make them any less valuable? I don't know. I mean, to me, it looks like it's not a very different species that they're looking at, if I may put it in that manner. Yeah.
Yeah, and when you're talking about, some of the challenges, just maybe there is a positive to this. In fact, the whole world is shifting online. Even when you do network eventually, when you sort of start with work and you're working in a global environment, I think there might be a need for students to learn this, how to reach out to people, how to work online, and how to collaborate in an online environment. So do you think that that's maybe some positive that's coming out of this?
Absolutely. No. I think, I mean, since, we are generally, all our conversations are happening in a backdrop of gloom, as it were, gloom and despair in some sense. We're always trying to sort of, justify saying, well, it's not so bad, it's not very different, etc., etc. I mean, you can't for a moment take away some of the positives. I think, screen time is certainly a problem. People spend a lot of time looking at screens, but I think people are a lot more efficient now. I mean, when I go to teach now, I don't have to worry about some of the other classroom overheads. So I think I work from the comforts of my office or my home. Meetings are a lot more efficient now. We don't have to go from point A to point B. The typical loss of time, the transaction costs, as I call them, when you get together in face-to-face meeting, especially when you're large groups of people, 10, 15 people, there are distractions on the side. There are small groups having private conversations. They may have their value. They may have their social value, organizational/institutional value. But clearly, we don't have to sort of incur those costs that we would normally incur if you were all to meet in a room. Yeah, all of those are, and as you rightly pointed out, and as many others have, online learning, it appears, will be an important part of how we learn in the years to come. And this kind of forces us to choose that option and make the best use of it. And so it might sort of accelerate our transition to online learning.
Yeah, I see the positive too.
Yeah.
Now, in this environment, I think you've talked about the transition that you made in terms of learning and the pedagogy and how the faculty is transitioning. How are the students who are going to be coming in next year? I mean, the admissions process are sort of going on at different schools. What is the response at IIM Bangalore? And I understand your point that ultimately what a student would be seeing is, if I get selected by IIM Bangalore, then I am in a certain set of students, and that itself is a stamp on my capability. But is there any hesitation this year? Are you facing any questions regarding the learning aspect or any other aspect from students?
So I have been through two online interactions myself. My colleague Bala, who engages with Nitin and others in the ecosystem, has been running his road shows. The turnout at the road show is in fact much stronger than it's been in the past. One obvious reason is that people can now join a road show from the comforts of their home or workplace. So they don't have to take the trouble to go to a meeting place. That could be one reason why we have a higher turnout, but the numbers are significantly higher than I would imagine that it's just not that. I think there is some, inherent interest in hearing about the program, which makes people come to the show. So it's not just us. So my counterparts in A and C and L, I am A, C, and L, we sometimes get together and exchange notes. What I hear from my counterpart in A is that they are getting very, very significant turnouts at their show too. Long story short, right now we are not worrying. We have been through one round of interviews. Round one is over. We've seen application levels that are very, very comparable in a favorable way to what we had in the same round the previous year. And this notwithstanding the fact that this year we intend to go through three rounds of admissions, which is the same as IIM Ahmedabad. So we sort of picked that idea from them. And so in spite of that, we've seen a very healthy turnout for round one. And we've seen some really, really awesome candidates. I've been, as chair of the program, I've been talking to people who sat in those panels. They're all very favorably impressed with the quality of candidates we met. So I think both in terms of the qualitative dimension as well as the quantitative dimension, we are not worried at all.
That's very encouraging to hear that.
Yeah. And I would hope that if there are people watching this interview, I would hope that they would sort of, take this as part of the feedback loop to the extent that they would find the feedback useful at this point as they make their choices. Yeah.
So to the people who are in fact watching, or to the people who are on the fence, I think that's the whole idea of the series. We are trying to talk to different B schools to understand what are they doing, and should students be worried or should they be positive about their journeys? What would your advice be to somebody who's on the fence in this environment? What would you tell him?
So that's, to my mind, a relatively easy question. Of course, you would, or anyone would say, I would say that, wouldn't I, given where I am? But that's not the reason. I would step back and ask myself, what is an MBA all about? I'm an MBA myself, of course, long ago. And what is the MBA all about? The MBA is, to my mind, and I say this to all my students too, I mean, we teach tools and techniques, we teach frameworks, we teach theories, but underlying all of that, what we're doing is that we are changing the way the individual thinks. The individual looks at business phenomena, the way the individual interprets phenomena in front of him, around her, right? And so one of the features of the world of business, pandemic or otherwise, is that you are dealing with highly uncertain futures. So people talk about as if the future has become a lot more indeterminable today. I'm not so sure. I think when I entered the world of business, I mean, the only other certainty was that my Bap Sarkar decided everything for us in India. But elsewhere in the world, Sarkar didn't decide everything for everyone, right? So today, Sarkar doesn't decide a lot of things for us. You are on your own. Otherwise, I think the element of uncertainty is the same. What we do in the business school is to tell people to embrace uncertainty. There are engineers who come from a very deterministic world. If I design an automobile with certain capabilities or some design features, the automobile will perform according to certain characteristics. It doesn't work that way in the world of business. So as I keep saying, what we encourage or teach our students to do is to embrace uncertainty. If they don't want to embrace it, at least tolerate it and deal with it, right? So if that is what we do inside a business school classroom, it's all the more important why you should get into a classroom in pandemic times, because the pandemic has exacerbated uncertainty. And inside the classroom, you're going to be even more acutely focused on this question of how do I deal with uncertainty? So my message to people who are fence sitting is, do not let the pandemic be a reason for your hesitating to choose in favor of an MBA. If the pandemic is a factor at all, it's a factor that should encourage you or nudge you into going into a business school classroom. If you have other hesitations about what will it do for me in terms of my career, is this the right point to do an MBA, is a full-time MBA, those are valid questions. And I encourage, even in a sales show, wherever we are with students, we encourage them to ask all those questions and we help them answer those questions. But the pandemic itself, to my mind, should, if anything, encourage you to get into a classroom and not the other way around.
All right. So to students who are going to be heading off to B school at IMB, at other places, we also want to give them a perspective of what's going to be different once they join. So I know it's a bit early, but the lockdowns are sort of opening by and by. What is going to be different? How do you sort of look at the future in terms of the hostels, the learning? How are things going to look once campus reopens?
I'm not a salesman, and so I should tell you the truth. My honest answer is, I don't know.
Yeah.
All that we know as an institution is that we miss our students very badly. And at the earliest opportunity, the moment we have come up with some ways to minimize the risk of people coming together on a campus, in a classroom, we will certainly adopt those precautions and get them into the classroom. But right now, when will that be? Do we have those precautions? I think the answer is pretty much up in the air. The growing numbers don't add to our comfort. And personally speaking, I know I'm on record, but personally speaking, my biggest concern is that we still don't know enough about this bug. Its behavior continues to fox people endlessly. Every week you are seeing a new research article published in a very respectable journal that contradicts that was published in the same journal or another equally respectable journal just a week or two earlier. Can surfaces transmit the virus? We were all told it would. Now we were told it will not. Earlier we were told it was a few hours. Then we were told 48 hours. Long story short, I think we are dealing with a bug that we still don't know enough about. And until we can either come to a point where we can, cure the disease that the bug causes or prevent the bug from infecting us, we would be in this phase of uncertainty. And until then, it would be foolhardy for anyone to say, in the next 3 months, we will open up their classrooms. That's my sense. But is that my institution stance? I don't know. I think as an institution, we are constantly evaluating. We evaluated at the end of term 1, we are nearing the end of term 2, we are still evaluating. And I think at the earliest opportunity, so I think the institutional stance, I'm not authorized to speak on behalf of the institution. That should be coming from the dean program or from the director. I'm not even speaking as the chair of the one-year MBA program. As somebody like you or anyone else who is reading the news, who is reading articles, trying to understand the literature around the bug, around the epidemic, my sense is we still are not in a position to say when life will resume, when normal life will resume. As an institution, we are trying to resume as quickly as we can. So for all you know, it might be early next year, or it might be by the first quarter, end of first quarter 2021. I don't know.
All right. It was very heartening to hear you say that you miss students, and I think the faculty would be missing. I was reading about the scenario in the US today, and it was being talked about in a very positive way that one student had switched on his camera in a Zoom meeting, in a Zoom environment, and the teacher was feeling very happy. I think Indian students would keep their cameras on all the time, if I'm not wrong. But it's hard.
We require them to. Yeah. We require them to. And I think they're also open to the idea. But here is another dimension that, that doesn't often feature or figure in our conversations. We are plagued by bandwidth issues, right? So students want to turn their cameras on. The faculty would like them to turn their cameras on, so that we get to as near an experience as possible to the classroom. But then bandwidth comes in the way, so they have to turn off their the videos so that they can conserve the bandwidth for audio communication. So I think infrastructurally, what is making life even more challenging is that infrastructurally we are not fully up to speed in terms of being able to deal with the consequences of the pandemic, whether it is communication, digital infrastructure, whether it's healthcare. All of them are, hopefully it'll make us rethink those issues. Yeah.
Great. This has been an enlightening conversation. Thank you for your time, Professor Sabrinathan. I wish that students are back with you very soon. And I hope this session, I think it should have been helpful for most people who are sitting on the fence and are trying to figure out their MBA plans. Thank you again for your time. And I wish you all the best for the coming season.
Thank you for your wishes, and thank you for having me on the program. And as you rightly said, I hope we've been able to give the listeners an honest sense of where we are. I mean, we are not snake oil salesmen. So I would like our students to get an honest sense of where we stand. And I think the overall picture, I would think, is still very, very positive. I think people should seriously think an MBA, and they would not regret, even if they are learning it online. I mean, I'm hoping that sort of by the time the next batch comes on board, we will definitely have significant classroom activity. But in the worst case, even in an online mode, I think it's well worth their time and money. I'd sort of leave it at that.
Great. Thank you so
Thank
much
you,
for your
Shikhar.
time, and I wish you all the best. See you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Talk to you soon
Bye-bye.
later.